December 1943. Fort Dix, New Jersey. The cold came through the walls. Not the dry cold of Punjab winters, where mornings cracked the earth and nights sharpened the stars. This was different. Wet. Heavy. The kind that settled into bones and stayed there, even when the barracks stove glowed red. Subedar Harnam Singh stood at the window, watching snow fall over the training grounds. He had seen snow before, high in the mountains, during the campaign in Italy. But never like this. Never so relentless. Never so far from anything that mattered. Behind him, 23 men slept in narrow cots. Indian soldiers. Sikhs, Punjabis, Marathas, Rajputs. Men who had fought across North Africa and Italy under British command. Men who had been pulled from the front lines 3 months ago and told they were being sent to America. For training, they said. For observation, they said. No one said why. Harnam turned from the window. The barracks were identical to 100 others he'd slept in, wooden, functional, cold. But the silence was different. In Italy, there had been artillery. In North Africa, wind against canvas. Here, there was only the hiss of steam pipes and the occasional cough. He walked between the cots, checking faces. Some slept deeply. Others stared at the ceiling, eyes open but unseeing. Naik Joginder Rai was awake. Subedar Sahib, he said quietly. How long? Harnam knew what he meant. Not how long until morning. How long until they went home? I don't know. The British officers don't tell us anything. They don't know either. Joginder sat up slowly, pulling the thin blanket around his shoulders. He was 24. Young. But his hands were scarred from loading artillery shells, and his eyes carried the flatness of someone who had seen too many friends die. We were told we'd be here 2 weeks, Joginder said. It's been 3 months. I know. The Americans don't know what to do with us. Harnam said nothing. It was true. They had arrived in October, part of a small contingent of Indian troops sent to the United States under a joint British-American military exchange program. The official purpose was vague: cross-training, cultural liaison, observation of American logistics and supply chains. But the reality was simpler. The British didn't want them in Europe anymore. Not after what happened in Italy. October 1943. Naples. The memory came back in fragments. A village outside Naples. German positions in the hills. Orders to advance. British officers shouting commands in English that half the men didn't fully understand. Harnam had been with the 4th Indian Division. They had fought well, better than well. They had taken the ridge. Held it. Lost 32 men doing it. And then the British command had pulled them back. Not because they failed. Because they succeeded. Because Indian troops taking a key position, without British infantry leading the charge, didn't fit the narrative. Harnam had heard the whispers. Seen the looks. The British officers were uncomfortable. The Americans, observing from a distance, were curious. And the Indian soldiers were exhausted. So they were sent away. Across the Atlantic. To a country most of them had only heard about in radio broadcasts. To a place where no one knew what to do with them. Fort Dix. Present. The morning bell rang at 0600. The men rose slowly, mechanically. They dressed in American-issued uniforms that didn't quite fit. They lined up outside in the snow, breath clouding in the frozen air. An American sergeant stood at the front of the formation. Young. Pale. Nervous. Good morning, men, he said, his voice too loud. No one responded. The sergeant cleared his throat. Today's schedule is the same as yesterday. Morning drill. Weapons maintenance. Afternoon lecture on supply chain logistics. Harnam watched the sergeant's face. The man was trying. But he didn't understand. These weren't recruits. They were combat veterans. Men who had fought in deserts and mountains. Men who had seen friends die and kept moving forward. They didn't need lectures on supply chains. They needed to know why they were here. Afternoon. Lecture hall. The room smelled of chalk and damp wool. An American lieutenant stood at the front, pointing to a map of the Pacific Theater. He spoke quickly, enthusiastically, about shipping routes and fuel depots and the importance of coordinated logistics. Harnum sat in the back row, arms crossed. Around him, the men stared at the map without seeing it. Joginder leaned close. He thinks we're students. He's doing his job. His job is pointless. Harnum didn't argue. The lieutenant finished his presentation and asked if there were questions. Silence. The lieutenant smiled awkwardly. Well, if you think of anything later, feel free to ask. The men filed out. Evening. Mess hall. The food was better than anything they'd had in Italy. Hot. Plentiful. But it tasted like nothing. Harnum sat with his men, eating in silence. Around them, American soldiers filled the hall, laughing, talking, complaining about the cold. No one spoke to the Indian troops. Not out of hostility. Out of uncertainty. The Americans didn't know what to say. Didn't know how to bridge the gap. So they said nothing. Joginder pushed his tray away. I got a letter today. Harnum looked up. From home? From my brother. He says my father is sick. Wants to know when I'm coming back. What did you tell him? I haven't written back yet. Joginder stared at the table. What do I say? That I'm in America, doing nothing? That I don't know when I'll see him again? Harnum set down his fork. Tell him you're doing your duty. What duty? We're not fighting. We're not training. We're just waiting. Then tell him you're waiting. Joginder looked at him, eyes hard. For what? Harnum didn't answer. Because he didn't know. Night. Barracks. The men wrote letters by candlelight. Some wrote to wives. Some to parents. Some to brothers and sisters who had no idea where they were. Harnum sat on his cot, a blank page in front of him. He had a wife. 2 daughters. A small farm outside Amritsar. He hadn't seen them in 3 years. He picked up the pen. Put it down. Picked it up again. Dear Coolant. I am well. The weather here is cold, but we are managing. The Americans are kind, though we do not see much of them. I hope you and the girls are healthy. Tell them I think of them every day. He stopped. What else could he say? That he was trapped in a place that didn't want him? That he had fought for an empire that didn't value him? That he didn't know if any of this mattered anymore? He folded the letter without finishing it. Across the room, Joginder was staring at the ceiling again. Subedar Sahib, he said quietly. Do you think they'll ever send us back? Harnum looked at him. Yes. When? When they're ready. And if they're never ready? Harnum didn't answer. Because the question had no answer. December 15th, 1943. 3 months had passed since they arrived. 3 months of drills that meant nothing. Lectures that went nowhere. Days that blurred into each other. The men were changing. Not visibly, but inside. Harnum saw it in their eyes. The way they moved. The way they stopped asking questions. They were becoming ghosts. Men who existed but didn't live. Who followed orders but didn't believe in them. Who waited without hope. And Harnum didn't know how to stop it. Morning. Commander's office. Harnum was summoned to see the base commander, a British colonel named Whitmore. Tall, gray-haired, with the kind of face that had forgotten how to smile. Subedar Singh, Whitmore said, not looking up from his desk. Sit. Harnum sat. Whitmore shuffled papers. I've received reports that morale among your men is declining. Yes, sir. Any idea why? Harnam chose his words carefully. They don't understand why they're here. They're here for training. With respect, sir, they've been trained. They've fought. They want to know when they'll fight again. Whitmore finally looked up. That's not for them to decide. I understand, sir. But they need purpose. Their purpose is to follow orders. Harnam said nothing. Whitmore leaned back. I know this isn't easy, Subedar. But the situation is complicated. The Americans are still deciding how to integrate colonial troops into their operations. The British command is cautious. We can't just send you back to Europe without a clear plan. So we wait. Yes. You wait. Harnam stood. Is that all, sir? That's all. He left the office, jaw tight. Afternoon. Training grounds. Harnam found Joginder sitting alone on a bench, staring at the empty field. They're not going to send us back, Joginder said without looking up. You don't know that. I do. Joginder turned to him. We're an embarrassment. Indian soldiers who fought too well. Who made the British look weak. So they sent us here, where no one has to think about us. That's not. It is. Joginder's voice was calm. Flat. We're not soldiers anymore, Subedar Sahib. We're just evidence. Evidence that the Empire doesn't work the way they say it does. Harnam sat down beside him. For a long time, neither spoke. Then Joginder said, My father died. Harnam turned sharply. When? 2 weeks ago. My brother sent another letter. It arrived yesterday. I'm sorry. Joginder nodded slowly. I wasn't there. I was here. Waiting. Harnam put a hand on his shoulder. Joginder didn't cry. Didn't move. Just stared at the field. I don't know what we're waiting for anymore, he said quietly. Harnam didn't either. But he knew they couldn't keep waiting like this. Something had to change. Night. December 20th, 1943. Harnam lay awake, listening to the wind rattle the windows. Outside, snow fell in thick, silent waves. Inside, 23 men slept, or pretended to. And Harnam made a decision. Tomorrow, he would find a way to give them purpose. Even if the army wouldn't. Even if the Empire wouldn't. He would. Because that was the only thing left that mattered. December 21st, 1943. Fort Dix, New Jersey. The idea came to Harnam in the early hours, when the barracks were still dark and the only sound was breathing. If the army wouldn't give his men purpose, he would find it elsewhere. He rose before dawn, dressed quietly, and walked across the frozen compound to the base library, a small building near the administrative offices that few soldiers used. Inside, a single lamp burned at the front desk. An elderly American woman sat behind it, reading a newspaper. She looked up as Harnam entered, surprise flickering across her face. Good morning, she said carefully. Good morning, ma'am. Harnam removed his cap. I'm looking for information about the local area. Towns nearby. Communities. The woman studied him for a moment. You're one of the Indian soldiers. Yes, ma'am. She set down her newspaper. There's a town about 3 miles east. Pemberton. Small. Mostly farms and a few shops. She paused. Why do you ask? Harnam chose his words carefully. My men have been here 3 months. They're good men. Disciplined. But they have nothing to do. I thought, perhaps there's work in town. Something useful. The woman's expression softened. You want them to help the community. If they'll have us. She was quiet for a moment, then reached under the desk and pulled out a folded map. The town council meets at the church every Thursday evening. Reverend Miller runs it. He's a good man. Fair. She circled a location on the map with a pencil. Tell him Mrs. Kowalski sent you. Harnam took the map. Thank you. As he turned to leave, she spoke again. Subedar? He stopped. Those boys in town, most of them are gone. Fighting in Europe or the Pacific. The people left behind, they're struggling. Farms need hands. Repairs need doing. If your men are willing to work, they'll be welcome. Harnam nodded slowly. We're willing. Morning. Barracks. Harnam gathered his men after breakfast. They stood in formation outside, breath clouding in the cold air. Faces tired. Eyes dull. I spoke with someone this morning, Harnam said. There's a town nearby. Pemberton. They need help. Farm work. Repairs. Things the army won't let us do here. Joginder frowned. We're soldiers, not laborers. Right now, we're neither. Harnam's voice was firm but not harsh. We're men with nothing to do. I'm offering you something to do. Silence. Then Sepoy Ranjit Singh, a quiet man from Haryana, spoke up. Will they pay us? I don't know. That's not why we do it. Then why? Harnam looked at each of them. Because sitting here is killing us. Because we need to remember what it feels like to be useful. Because if we don't do something, we'll forget who we are. More silence. Then Joginder stepped forward. I'll go. One by one, the others followed. Thursday evening. Pemberton Methodist Church. The church was small, white-painted wood with a simple steeple. Inside, about 20 people sat in pews, older men, women, a few teenagers. Faces weathered by work and worry. Harnam entered alone, cap in hand. The conversation stopped. Every head turned. Reverend Miller stood at the front, a man in his 60s, thin, with kind eyes and calloused hands. He stepped forward. Can I help you, son? Reverend Miller, my name is Subedar Harnam Singh. Mrs. Kowalski at the base library suggested I speak with you. Miller's eyebrows rose. You're one of the Indian soldiers at Fort Dix. Yes, sir. What brings you here? Harnam kept his voice steady. My men and I have been at the base for 3 months. We're trained soldiers, but we're not being deployed. We're not being used. I came to ask if there's work in your community. Things that need doing. We're willing to help. The room was silent. An older woman in the front row spoke up, her voice sharp. Why would you want to help us? Because we need purpose, ma'am. And because it's the right thing to do. A man in his 50s, wearing overalls, stood. You're asking to work for free? We're asking to be useful. The man studied him. I'm Tom Brennan. I run a dairy farm north of town. Lost both my sons to the war. One in France, one in the Pacific. I've got 40 head of cattle and no one to help with the winter work. He paused. You serious about this? Yes, sir. Brennan looked at Reverend Miller, then back at Harnam. All right. Bring your men Saturday morning. 6 o'clock. We'll see what you're made of. Saturday, December 25th, 1943. Christmas morning. 12 men volunteered for the first work detail. They left Fort Dix before dawn, walking the 3 miles to Brennan's farm in the dark. The cold bit through their uniforms, but no one complained. The farm appeared as the sun rose, a large red barn, a white farmhouse, fields stretching into the distance. Brennan stood waiting by the barn, arms crossed. He looked them over without expression. You know anything about dairy farming? No, sir, Harnam said. But we learn fast. Brennan grunted. We'll see. Follow me. The work was hard. Hauling feed. Mucking stalls. Repairing fence posts frozen into the ground. The kind of labor that made muscles scream and hands crack. But the men worked without complaint. Joginder, who had loaded artillery shells in the desert, hauled 100-pound feed sacks like they weighed nothing. Ranjit, who had marched across Italy, repaired fences with the same precision he'd used to clean his rifle. Brennan watched them, saying little. At noon, he brought out sandwiches and hot coffee. The men ate standing, too tired to sit. Brennan approached Harnam. "Your men work hard. They're good men. Where'd they fight?" "North Africa. Italy." Brennan was quiet for a moment. "My son Michael, the one in France, he wrote about Indian soldiers. Said they held a position when everyone else retreated. Said they saved his unit." Harnam said nothing. Brennan looked at the men, then back at Harnam. "You're welcome here. Long as you want to come." Evening. Farmhouse. Before they left, Brennan's wife, Margaret, came out of the house carrying a basket. "It's Christmas," she said simply. "You shouldn't go back empty-handed." Inside the basket were apples, bread, a jar of honey, and a small fruitcake. Harnam hesitated. "Ma'am, we can't." "You can. And you will." Her voice was firm but warm. "You worked hard today. You earned it." Joginder stepped forward and took the basket. "Thank you, ma'am." Margaret smiled, the first real smile any of them had seen in months. "Merry Christmas, boys." Night. Barracks. The men sat in a circle, passing around pieces of fruitcake. It was dense, sweet, heavy with raisins and spices. Nothing like anything they'd tasted before. But it was the best thing they'd eaten in months. Not because of the taste. Because of what it meant. Ranjit spoke first. "That man, Brennan. He lost both his sons." "I know," Harnam said. "And he still helped us. Fed us. Thanked us." Joginder stared at the piece of cake in his hand. "We didn't do anything special. Just farm work." "It was special to him," Harnam said quietly. Silence settled over the group. Then Sepoy Pritam Singh, who rarely spoke, said, "I want to go back next week." "Me too," Ranjit said. One by one, the others agreed. Harnam looked at their faces. The dullness was gone. Something else had replaced it. Not happiness. Not yet. But something close to hope. January 1944. Word spread. By the second week of January, more townspeople approached Reverend Miller. A widow needed her roof repaired before the next snowstorm. The schoolhouse needed firewood split and stacked. An elderly couple needed help clearing a collapsed shed. Harnam organized work details every Saturday and Sunday. Sometimes 12 men. Sometimes 20. They worked in silence, efficiently, without asking for anything in return. The townspeople began to notice. At first, they watched from a distance, curious, uncertain. But slowly, they began to approach. To offer coffee. To ask questions. "Where are you from?" "Punjab." "Haryana." "Maharashtra." "What's it like there?" "Hot." "Dry." "Beautiful." "Do you miss it?" "Every day." The conversations were simple. Halting. But they were real. Mid-January. Pemberton General Store. Harnam was buying supplies, nails, rope, tools for the weekend work, when a teenage girl approached him. She was about 16, thin, with nervous eyes. "Excuse me," she said quietly. "Are you Subedar Singh?" "Yes." "My name is Emily Brennan. Tom Brennan is my uncle." Harnam nodded. "Your uncle is a good man. He talks about you. About your soldiers." She hesitated. "I wanted to ask, would you be willing to speak at our school?" "Speak? About where you're from. About the war. About..." She trailed off. "Most of us have never met anyone from India. We don't know anything about it. And our teacher, Mrs. Henderson, she thought it would be good for us to learn." Harnam considered. "I'm not a teacher. You don't have to be. Just talk to us." Tell us your story. He looked at her earnest face. When? Next Friday. If you can. I'll ask my commanding officer. Emily smiled, small, but genuine. Thank you. January 21st, 1944. Pemberton High School. Colonel Whitmore had been reluctant. But Reverend Miller had written a formal letter, and the base commander, an American general, had approved it. So Harnum stood in front of 30 teenagers, feeling more nervous than he'd felt facing German artillery. Mrs. Henderson introduced him. Class, this is Subedar Harnam Singh. He's a soldier from India, serving with the British Army. He's agreed to speak with us today. Harnam cleared his throat. Thank you for having me. The students stared at him, curious, silent. He began slowly. I come from a village in Punjab. It's in northern India. My family has farmed the same land for 5 generations. I have a wife and 2 daughters. I haven't seen them in 3 years. A boy in the front row raised his hand. Why did you join the army? Because my country was at war. And because I believed it was my duty. But it's not your war, the boy said. It's Britain's war. Harnam paused. That's true. But when your home is threatened, borders don't matter. When your family is in danger, politics don't matter. You fight because you have to. A girl near the back spoke up. What was it like? Fighting in the war? Harnam chose his words carefully. It was hard. Frightening. We lost many friends. But we kept going because we had each other. Because we believed in something larger than ourselves. Do you regret it? Another student asked. Harnam looked at the young faces staring back at him. No. I don't regret serving. But I regret the cost. I regret the time away from my family. I regret the friends I lost. He paused. War is necessary sometimes. But it's never good. The room was silent. Then Emily Brennan raised her hand. What do you want us to know? About you and your soldiers? Harnam thought for a long moment. I want you to know that we're not so different. We come from different places. We speak different languages. We pray to different gods. But we all want the same things. Safety. Family. A future worth living for. He looked at each of them. And I want you to know that your community, your town, has given us something we lost. You've reminded us why we fight. Not for empires or flags. But for people. For kindness. For the chance to be useful. No one spoke. Then, slowly, one student began to clap. Then another. Then the whole class. Harnam stood there, overwhelmed, as 30 teenagers applauded, not for a hero, but for a man who had simply told the truth. Evening. Barracks. Harnam returned to find his men waiting. How did it go? Joginder asked. Better than I expected. What did you tell them? The truth. Joginder smiled, the first real smile Harnam had seen from him in months. Good. February 1944. The work continued. Every weekend, Indian soldiers walked to Pemberton. They repaired roofs, split firewood, cleared snow, mended fences. They spoke little, but their presence spoke volumes. The townspeople responded in kind. They invited the soldiers to Sunday dinners. They taught them about American customs. They asked about India, about their families, about their lives before the war. Slowly, something remarkable happened. The soldiers stopped being strangers. They became neighbors. February 14, 1944. Brennan Farm. Tom Brennan pulled Harnam aside as the work detail was finishing for the day. I got a letter yesterday, Brennan said. From my son Michael. He's still in France. That's good news. He asked about you. About the Indian soldiers. I told him you've been helping us. Brennan paused, his voice thick. He said to tell you thank you. said if it weren't for soldiers like you, he wouldn't be alive. Harnam didn't know what to say. Brennan extended his hand. I know you're far from home. I know this isn't where you want to be. But I want you to know, you've made a difference here. To me. To this town. To people who needed help and didn't know where to find it. Harnam shook his hand. Thank you, sir. No. Thank you. Night. Barracks. Harnam sat on his cot, finally finishing the letter he'd started months ago. Dear Coolant. I am well. The weather here is still cold, but I have grown used to it. I have not been in battle, but I have been fighting a different kind of war, a war against purposelessness, against despair. I have found something here I did not expect. A community that needed help. People who have lost as much as we have, but who still find the strength to be kind. I do not know when I will come home. But I know now that the waiting has not been wasted. I have learned that duty is not just about fighting. It is about being useful. About remembering our humanity, even when the world tries to take it from us. Tell the girls I love them. Tell them their father is still a soldier, just a different kind than before. With all my love. Harnam. He folded the letter, sealed it, and set it aside. Outside, snow continued to fall. But inside, something had changed. The men were no longer ghosts. They were soldiers again. Not because they were fighting, but because they had found something worth protecting. March 1944. Fort Dix, New Jersey. Spring came slowly to New Jersey. The snow melted in patches, revealing brown grass and frozen mud. The days grew longer, but the cold lingered, stubborn, reluctant to release its grip. Harnam stood outside the barracks, watching his men prepare for another Saturday in Pemberton. They moved with purpose now. Checked their tools. Spoke quietly among themselves. Smiled occasionally. They were different men than they had been in December. Not healed, but no longer broken. Joginder approached, carrying a canvas bag of carpentry tools. Reverend Miller says the church needs new pews. The old ones are rotting through. How many men do you need? 6. Maybe 8 if we want to finish before Easter. Harnam nodded. Take who you need. Joginder hesitated. Subedar Sahib, have you heard anything? About deployment? No. It's been 5 months. I know. The men are asking. They're grateful for the work in town, but... Joginder trailed off. But they're still soldiers, Harnam finished. Yes. Harnam looked at the men loading into the truck that would take them to Pemberton. Tell them to be patient. Something will come. But he didn't believe it anymore. March 11th, 1944. Pemberton Methodist Church. 8 men worked on the pews, measuring, cutting, sanding, fitting. The church smelled of sawdust and varnish. Reverend Miller moved among them, offering water and encouragement. You boys are doing the Lord's work, he said. These pews will last another 50 years. Ranjit looked up from his work. Will the church still be here in 50 years? Miller smiled. If God wills it. And if good men keep taking care of it. At noon, Margaret Brennan arrived with lunch, sandwiches, apples, thermoses of hot soup. The men ate in the pews they were building, careful not to spill. Emily Brennan came with her aunt. She had visited the work site several times since Harnam's talk at the school, always curious, always asking questions. She sat next to Joginder. My teacher wants to know if Subedar Singh would speak again. To the whole town this time. Joginder glanced at her. Why? Because people are talking. About you. About what you're doing here. She paused. Some people don't understand. They think you're taking jobs from Americans. Or that you're here because you did something wrong. Joginder's jaw tightened. We're here because the army sent us here. I know that. But not everyone does. Emily looked at him earnestly. If Subedar Singh spoke, if people heard your story, it might help. Joginder was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I'll ask him. March 15, 1944. Town Hall meeting. The town hall was packed. Over 100 people filled the wooden chairs and lined the walls. Farmers, shopkeepers, housewives, elderly men, teenagers. Faces Harnam recognized from months of work, and faces he'd never seen. Reverend Miller stood at the front. Thank you all for coming. We've gathered tonight to hear from Subedar Harnam Singh, who has been leading the Indian soldiers helping our community these past months. Harnam walked to the front, acutely aware of every eye on him. He had faced enemy fire, had led men through minefields and artillery barrages. But standing in front of this crowd felt different. More personal. More vulnerable. He cleared his throat. Thank you for having me. A man in the back shouted, Why are you really here? The room went silent. Harnam kept his voice steady. We're here because the British Army sent us. We fought in North Africa and Italy. We were pulled from the front lines and sent to America for reasons we don't fully understand. We've been at Fort Dix for 5 months, waiting for orders that haven't come. So you're deserters, another voice called out. No, sir. We're soldiers following orders. We didn't choose to come here. But since we're here, we've tried to be useful. A woman near the front stood. My husband works at the mill. He says you're taking work from Americans. Ma'am, we're not taking anything. We're not being paid. We're volunteering our time because we need purpose, and because your community has been kind to us. Tom Brennan stood up. I'd like to say something. The room turned to him. I've had these men working my farm since Christmas. They've done more work in 3 months than I could have done in a year. They've asked for nothing. No pay. No special treatment. Just the chance to be useful. His voice grew firmer. My son is fighting in France right now. He's fighting alongside Indian soldiers. Soldiers who have saved American lives. So before anyone here questions why these men are in our town, remember that their brothers are dying for the same cause our sons are dying for. Silence. Then Margaret Brennan stood. They helped me repair my roof. They split firewood for Mrs. Henderson. They built new pews for our church. They've been nothing but respectful and hardworking. I don't care why they're here. I'm grateful they are. One by one, others stood. They cleared snow from my mother's house when she was too sick to do it herself. They fixed the schoolhouse door that's been broken for 2 years. They taught my son how to repair a fence properly. Harnam stood there, overwhelmed, as person after person spoke. Not everyone was convinced. Some faces remained skeptical, arms crossed. But the tide had shifted. Reverend Miller raised his hand. I think we've heard enough. These men have proven themselves through their actions. They're welcome in Pemberton as long as they wish to stay. Scattered applause grew into something louder. Harnam nodded his thanks and stepped down. As he walked toward the exit, an elderly man stopped him. My name is Frank Morrison. I fought in the First War. France. 1918, he extended his hand. I know what it's like to be far from home, doing a job no one understands. You're doing good work, son. Don't let anyone tell you different. Harnam shook his hand. Thank you, sir. March 20th, 1944. Fort Dix. Harnam was summoned to Colonel Whitmore's office. He entered to find not just Whitmore, but an American general, 2 stars on his shoulders, and a British brigadier he didn't recognize. Subedar Singh, Whitmore said. This is General Patterson and Brigadier Thornton. Harnam saluted. General Patterson gestured to a chair. Sit, Subedar. Harnam sat, back straight, hands on his knees. Patterson studied him for a long moment. I've been reading reports about your activities in Pemberton. Community service. Public speaking. Building relationships with civilians. Harnam's stomach tightened. Yes, sir. You did this without authorization. I asked permission to leave the base on weekends, sir. It was granted. For personal time. Not for organized labor details. Yes, sir. Silence. Then Patterson smiled, slight, but genuine. Relax, Subedar. You're not in trouble. Harnam blinked. Brigadier Thornton leaned forward. In fact, you've done something rather remarkable. You've turned a potential embarrassment into a public relations success. Sir? Patterson pulled out a folder. We've received letters. Dozens of them. From townspeople in Pemberton. From local officials. From the mayor. All praising your men. All asking if you can stay longer. He set the folder down. Do you understand what you've done? No, sir. You've shown Americans that Indian soldiers aren't just capable fighters. You've shown them that you're disciplined, respectful, and valuable members of a community. You've done more for Allied unity in 3 months than 100 propaganda films could do in a year. Harnam said nothing. Thornton spoke. The original plan was to send you back to Europe in April. But we're reconsidering. There's talk of expanding this program. Sending other Indian units to American communities. Using your model as a template. Harnam's chest tightened. Sir, with respect, my men are soldiers. They want to fight. I understand that. But right now, what you're doing is more important than fighting. How can that be, sir? Patterson leaned back. Because wars aren't just won on battlefields, Subedar. They're won in hearts and minds. Right now, there are people in America who don't understand why we're fighting. Who don't understand what's at stake. But when they see your men, when they work alongside you, eat with you, talk with you, they understand. They see that this war is about more than borders and politics. It's about people. About humanity. Harnam looked at the general. My men didn't come here to be symbols, sir. They came to serve. And they are serving. Just not in the way they expected. Silence settled over the room. Then Harnam said quietly, what if they don't want to stay? Then we'll send them back, Patterson said. But I'm asking you to consider it. To talk to your men. To see if they're willing to continue what they've started. Harnam stood. I'll speak with them, sir. Evening. Barracks. Harnam gathered all 23 men. They sat on cots and footlockers, faces tired from the day's work. He told them everything, the meeting, the letters, the proposal. When he finished, silence filled the barracks. Then Joginder spoke. They want us to stay here. To keep doing farm work and building pews. Yes. Instead of fighting. Yes. Joginder looked at the floor. I don't know if I can do that. Ranjit spoke up. Why not? We've been doing it for months. Because it's not what we signed up for. We're soldiers. Not laborers. We're both, Harnam said quietly. We've always been both. Pritam Singh, who rarely spoke, said, I like the work in Pemberton. I like feeling useful. But I also feel like I'm hiding. Like I'm avoiding the real war. Heads nodded. Harnam looked at each of them. I can't make this decision for you. But I'll tell you what I think. He paused. I think what we're doing here matters. Not because it's easy. Not because it's safe. But because it's changing something. We're showing people that we're more than what they thought we were. We're building bridges that will last long after this war ends. But what about our duty? Joginder asked. What about fighting? This is fighting, Harnam said. Just a different kind. We're fighting ignorance. We're fighting isolation. We're fighting the idea that people from different worlds can't understand each other. Silence. Then Sepoy Gurmeet Singh, a quiet man from a village near Amritsar, spoke. My son is 8 years old. I haven't seen him in 3 years. When I go home, if I go home, I want to tell him something that matters. I want to tell him I fought for something real. Something good. He looked at Harnam. I think what we're doing here is real. I think it's good. I'll stay. One by one, others spoke. I'll stay. Me too. I'm willing. Not everyone agreed. 3 men wanted to return to combat. Harnam respected that. But 20 men chose to stay. April 1944. Pemberton. Spring arrived in earnest. The fields turned green. Trees budded. The air warmed, carrying the scent of earth and growing things. The Indian soldiers continued their work, but now with official support. The army provided tools, transportation, coordination with local officials. More towns requested help. Millville, Mount Holly, Burlington. The program expanded. By May, 50 Indian soldiers were working in communities across New Jersey. By June, 100. They built. They repaired. They planted. They taught. And slowly, something remarkable happened. Americans who had never thought about India began to ask questions. To learn. To understand. And Indian soldiers who had felt invisible began to feel seen. June 6, 1944. D-Day. The news came over the radio. Allied forces had landed in Normandy. The invasion of Europe had begun. The men gathered around the radio in the barracks, listening in silence as the announcer described the beaches, the casualties, the desperate fighting. Joginder turned off the radio. They're fighting without us. Yes, Harnam said. Does that bother you? Harnam thought for a long moment. It did. But not anymore. Why? Because I realized something. There are many ways to serve. Many ways to fight. We're not on those beaches. But we're still in this war. We're still making a difference. Joginder looked at him. Do you really believe that? Yes. I do. July 4th, 1944. Independence Day. Pemberton held a celebration in the town square. Flags hung from buildings. A band played patriotic songs. Tables were laden with food, pies, roasted chicken, corn on the cob, lemonade. And for the first time, the Indian soldiers were invited not as workers, but as guests. They stood awkwardly at first, unsure of their place. But Tom Brennan pulled Harnam into the crowd. Margaret Brennan handed plates to Joginder and Ranjit. Emily Brennan introduced Preetam to her friends. Reverend Miller stood on a makeshift stage and called for attention. Today, we celebrate independence. Freedom. The right to determine our own future. He paused. But we also celebrate something else. Unity. The understanding that we're stronger together than apart. That differences in language, culture, and background don't divide us, they enrich us. He gestured to the Indian soldiers. These men have been with us for 7 months. They've worked our farms, repaired our buildings, and become part of our community. They've shown us that the fight for freedom isn't just happening on distant battlefields. It's happening here. In small acts of kindness. In bridges built between strangers. In the choice to see each other as human beings, not as foreigners. The crowd applauded. Harnam stood there, surrounded by people who had been strangers 6 months ago, and felt something he hadn't felt in years. Not happiness, exactly. But peace. A sense that he was exactly where he needed to be. August 1944. Brennan Farm. Harnam and Joginder worked side by side, repairing a section of fence damaged by a summer storm. They worked in comfortable silence, the kind that comes from months of shared labor. Finally, Joginder spoke. I got a letter from my brother yesterday. How is he? Better. He's remarried. Has a new son. Joginder hammered a nail into place. He said he understands now. Why I'm here. What I'm doing. What changed his mind. I told him about Brennan. About the town. About the people who've lost sons and husbands but still find the strength to be kind. Joginder looked at Harnam. I told him I'm not hiding from the war. I'm fighting it in a different way. Harnam nodded. And he believed you. He said he's proud of me. Joginder's voice was quiet. That's all I needed to hear. They returned to work. After a while, Tom Brennan walked over, carrying 2 glasses of cold water. You boys have been at it all morning. Take a break. They drank gratefully. Brennan looked at the repaired fence, then at them. I got a letter yesterday too. From Michael. He's coming home. Harnam straightened. That's wonderful news, sir. He was wounded. Nothing serious, but enough to get him sent back. Brennan's voice was thick. He'll be here in September. We're happy for you, Joginder said. Brennan looked at them both. He asked about you. Wants to meet you when he gets back. Harnam smiled. We'd be honored. Brennan nodded, then cleared his throat. I want you to know something. When you first came here, I didn't know what to think. Didn't know if I could trust you. But you've proven yourselves 100 times over. You've become... He paused, searching for words. You've become family. Harnam felt his throat tighten. Thank you, sir. Brennan extended his hand. No. Thank you. September 1944. Pemberton train station. Michael Brennan stepped off the train, thin, pale, with a bandage visible under his uniform sleeve. Tom and Margaret rushed forward, embracing him. Emily cried. Harnam and Joginder stood at a respectful distance, waiting. When the family finally separated, Michael looked around. His eyes found Harnam. He walked over slowly. Subedar Singh? Yes, sir. Michael extended his hand. I'm Michael Brennan. I've heard a lot about you. Harnam shook his hand. Welcome home, sir. I wanted to thank you. For helping my family. For being here when I couldn't be. We were honored to help. Michael looked at him for a long moment. I fought alongside Indian soldiers in France. They saved my life more than once. When my father wrote and told me you were here, helping our town, I wasn't surprised. Because I know what kind of men you are. Harnam didn't know what to say. Michael turned to Joginder. And you are? Naik Joginder Rai, sir. Thank you, Naik. For everything. Joginder nodded, unable to speak. Tom Brennan put his arm around his son. Come on. Let's get you home. As the family walked away, Michael looked back once and raised his hand in salute. Harnam and Joginder saluted back. October 1944. 1 year later. Harnam stood at the same window where he'd stood a year ago, watching snow begin to fall. But everything was different now. The barracks were no longer silent. Men talked, laughed, shared stories. They wrote letters home with pride instead of shame. They slept deeply instead of staring at ceilings. They were still far from home. But they were no longer lost. Joginder approached. The town council wants to hold a ceremony next month. To thank us officially. Do they? Reverend Miller says they're going to present us with a plaque. In recognition of service to the community. Harnam smiled. What do you think of that? I think it's strange. We didn't do anything extraordinary. Didn't we? Joginder considered. I suppose we did. We just didn't realize it at the time. Harnam turned from the window. Do you regret staying? Not going back to combat? Joginder was quiet for a long moment. No. I don't regret it. Because I understand now what you meant. About fighting different kinds of wars. About building bridges. He paused. I think what we did here will matter more than any battle we could have fought. Why? Because battles end. But what we built here, the connections, the understanding, that will last. Long after the war is over, people will remember. They'll remember that soldiers from India came to their town and helped them. That we weren't enemies or strangers. That we were just men, trying to do good. Harnam put his hand on Joginder's shoulder. You've become wise, Naik. Joginder smiled. I learned from a good teacher. November 11th, 1944. Armistice Day ceremony. The entire town gathered in the square. A platform had been built. American and British flags hung side by side. A banner read, "In gratitude to our Indian friends." Reverend Miller stood at the podium. Today, we honor those who served in the Great War. But we also honor those who serve today, in ways both seen and unseen. He called Harnam to the stage. Harnam walked forward, acutely aware of every eye on him. The 20 men who had stayed stood at attention below. Miller handed him a wooden plaque. It read, "To Subedar Harnam Singh and the soldiers of the Indian Army. For service, sacrifice, and friendship. You came as strangers. You leave as family." Pemberton, New Jersey. 1944. Harnam stared at the plaque, unable to speak. Miller leaned close. Say something. Harnam looked out at the crowd. At faces he knew. At people who had fed him, worked beside him, welcomed him. He cleared his throat. When we came here a year ago, we were lost. We didn't know why we were here or what we were supposed to do. We felt invisible. Useless. Forgotten. He paused, gathering his thoughts. But you saw us. You gave us purpose. You reminded us that service isn't just about fighting. It's about helping. About building. About being present when people need you. His voice grew stronger. We came from a place most of you will never see. We speak languages you don't understand. We pray to gods you don't worship. But you didn't let that stop you from seeing us as human beings. As neighbors. As friends. He looked at Tom Brennan, standing with his son. At Margaret. At Emily. At Reverend Miller. You gave us something we thought we'd lost. Hope. Purpose. A reason to keep going. And for that, we will be forever grateful. He held up the plaque. This will hang in our barracks. And when we finally go home, whenever that may be, we will take the memory of this place with us. We will tell our children and grandchildren about the town in America that welcomed us. That saw past our differences. That taught us what it means to truly serve. Silence. Then applause, thunderous, sustained. Harnam stepped down, eyes burning. Joginder met him at the bottom of the stage. Well said, Subedar Sahib. Harnam looked at his men, standing tall, proud, no longer ghosts. We did it, he said quietly. Did what? We found our way home. Even though we're still far from it. December 1944. Barracks. Night. Harnam sat on his cot, writing a letter. Dear Coolant. I have news. We will be returning to India in the spring. The war in Europe is turning. The army no longer needs us here. I am ready to come home. Ready to see you and the girls. Ready to return to the farm and the life we built together. But I will leave a part of myself here. In a small town in New Jersey. In the people who welcomed us. In the work we did. In the bridges we built. I came here a soldier. I leave a better man. I will tell you everything when I see you. But for now, know that I am well. That I am proud of what we accomplished. And that I carry you with me always. With all my love. Harnam. He sealed the letter and set it aside. Outside, snow fell softly over Fort Dix. Inside, 20 men slept peacefully. They had been far from home. But they had found something just as important. They had found purpose. They had found connection. They had found proof that even in the darkest times, Humanity could bridge any distance. And that was worth more than any battle they could have fought. Spring 1945. The Indian soldiers left Pemberton on a clear April morning. The entire town came to see them off. Tom Brennan shook each man's hand. Margaret hugged them. Emily cried. Reverend Miller offered prayers. As the trucks pulled away, Harnum looked back one last time. At the church with its new pews. At the farms they'd helped maintain. At the people who had become family. Joginder sat beside him. "Do you think we'll ever come back?" Harnum smiled. "I don't know. But I know we'll never forget." The trucks rolled toward Fort Dix, toward ships that would carry them across the ocean, toward home. But they carried something with them. A plaque. Letters. Photographs. Memories. And the certainty that they had fought a war that mattered. Not with guns. But with hammers and saws and open hearts. Not on battlefields. But in barns and churches and town squares. They had come as strangers. They left as brothers. And that changed everything.